It's under show webinar.
All right, should be good to go.
We all set?
Yes.
Good afternoon, good evening. I'd like to call the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for 10 July 2024 to order. Please stand and salute, pledge allegiance to the flag.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right, Maureen, could you please do the roll call?
Commissioner Thomas,
Here.
Commissioner Ryan,
Here.
Commissioner Nathaniel,
Here.
Commissioner Cascarelli. Here. Chairman Sobieski.
Here.
Commissioner Woods,
Here.
Commissioner Rose,
Here.
Commissioner Hoffman,
Here.
Commissioner Washington. Here.
Thank you. I'd like to see Commissioner Droz for Commissioner Claffey is not here.
Oh, I think Commissioner Claffey is just joining online.
Oh, yes, okay.
Yep, just got here.
All right.
Sorry about that.
Thank you. All right, we're all
Thank
set. Approval of the agenda, Mr. Planner?
No changes.
No changes, good. Okay, we'll go to public participation. We should speak from the public, either here or at home.
No one online has their hand raised, Mr. Chairman.
You coming up, Bob?
Yeah.
Question, I don't know who can answer. It's just a generalized question. Rocket Street and Kids Lane, Citgo owns the property there. And they cut down all the trees last year and grass grew real high during the summer. I was just wondering if anybody had any idea, or is there any plans moving forward, what Citgo's gonna do with that property? If anybody can give me an update whenever they can.
Bob, I have not seen any, Mr. Planner.
No.
Eric?
No, we talked to him before. The guy asked them not to cut the stuff down, but they were thinking about marketing it. Have not heard back from them since.
Okay, we haven't heard any yet. We will. All right,
That's, yeah, I was just.
thank you.
Just sitting there somewhere.
Yeah. Thank you. Anybody else? Anybody online, Eric?
Nobody online has their hand raised, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Move over to the zoning officer's report. Yep. Everybody have time, excuse me, everybody have time to look at the zoning officer's report? Is there any questions? Comments? I can see that it's small. Relatively.
Relative, well, you know, it's also more blight this time of year, which isn't on here, so.
All right, thank you, Eric. I think you do a great job out there, in my opinion. Sure as commissions. All right, thank you. Next is remarks by commissioners. Any commissioners have any remarks? Okay. There are no public hearings, so we're gonna go to approval of the minutes. First one is I need a motion to approve minutes from June 12th, 2024. So moved. Is there a second? Second. Move the second. Any discussion?
Excuse me, sir.
Yes,
I can't vote on that because I wasn't seated, so somebody else is gonna have to second that.
okay. Is there another, somebody else can second this, please? All right, Alan Nafis, thank you. All right, any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Opposed? Thank you, passed unanimously.
So Mr. Hoffman, you abstained from that vote? Is that, or no?
Yes, I'm sorry, yes, Commissioner Hoffman abstained from that vote, I'm sorry.
Yes, he's not seating because Claffey.
All right, next is the approval of the minutes for 10 April. I need a motion to approve.
Sure.
Commissioner Droz?
It really, really worries me as to the minutes in general. I know that I was the one who brought up concerns with this because I had gone back and reread.
Right.
And there were 4 or 5 points that I brought up, which would have been the meeting after the April 10th, so the last meeting of April, And with the revised version that we've been given now, there's still two things that are missing.
Okay,
And what scares the heck out of me is think about how many people remember what they had for lunch 3 Tuesdays ago.
I see your point.
And it was just a few meetings ago when a concerned citizen did spectacular research and pulled up minutes from notes from a decade and a half ago,
Right.
actual quotes from the applicant. And it's once it's voted on, it's hard and
Okay.
fast, and it really kind of worries me.
All right.
So basically of page 30, between the quote between Commissioner Nafis and Commissioner Fox, I had written originally that there was another person who had spoken in there, and it's omitted on both. Yes, sir?
Yep, if I could, Mr. Chairman, I did review that part of it, and what I heard between the speaking of that was actually the chairman calling on somebody
Okay,
to speak. So
Okay.
that it wasn't anything of substance, it was more just an acknowledgement of another commission member to speak. So
Okay.
yes, I did review that one.
thank you, thank you. And one of the other notes I had made was I was talking about the discussion of cannabis and of the retailers, et cetera. And I was talking about the comparison, if you will, between citizens who are very anti-cannabis and others who might be users and or pro-cannabis. And how we wanted to be careful that we didn't have a knee-jerk, using that word specifically, reaction to one side talking louder than the other side. And it had been written, what I had said is, being a major reaction to one side of the coin. Major reaction is very different from my point being that would be being reactionary as a knee-jerk reaction versus a major reaction. And I brought that up in April, and it's still in the new notes.
Okay.
I'm scared
All
to
right.
heck about these, just in general. And I
No,
haven't even gone through
I
these yet.
understand that.
I'm sorry, but
No,
it scares the heck
Commissioner
out of me.
Droge, you're correct.
We're talking like.
Why don't, would you review those?
Yeah, I did review it and I thought it had been changed to knee jerk under major. What we can do, and actually, so the way it kind of works, in speaking with the town clerk, is once the minutes are posted, that those minutes are the minutes. And then what actions happen by the TBZ happen within this, and it just kind of gets held within the next minutes. It's something I've discussed with James about how we work through that process. I thought that one had been changed. I thought I saw it before I went on vacation, and this was sent out. But yeah, the other one, the tend to self-regulate, was changed.
Yeah. So
Because I went through and looked at all the different ones that were that. So other than major, yeah. So what I would recommend that if the commission would like to approve these tonight, that might be one of the ones that's kind of left over that that motion include to amend. That would be page 31. And that would be line, let's see, 1, 2, where's the major? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, on page, line 7. Discussion is a major, should read discussion is a knee-jerk reaction. So that would be my recommendation, that a motion, anything to approve the minutes would include that change.
amendment.
Commissioner Droge,
I'd be absolutely fine with that.
would you make that motion?
I can't, sir, I'm not seated.
I'm sorry?
I can't, sir, I'm not seated.
I still can't hear you. I'm sorry.
I'm not seated.
Oh, yes, you can.
Okay, let's make the motion to accept that.
You can make that motion. Yeah.
Yep, no, I believe he does need to be seated to.
Oh, he
vote on
needs to be,
this.
all right, I'm sorry.
Fine.
Need a motion? Mr. Fox? Would you make that motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. Now I go back to the original, or does that cover the total minutes? Or do we have to have another one to do that?
Yep, I believe the motion was, yeah, the approval with the amendment.
Yes.
All right, so we need a second motion?
Nope.
No, we're all set, good, all right. Next is new business, I believe, electric vehicle charging.
Correct.
Yep. So this is an item that I've brought back in front of the TPZ. It was discussed previously, but this is Public Act 2225. So the Public Act requires that A municipality shall require each new construction of commercial building or multi-tenant residential building with 30 or more designated parking spaces for cars or light-duty trucks to include electric vehicle charging infrastructure that is capable of supporting level 2 electric charging stations or direct current fast charging station and at least 10% of such parking spaces. What I've done is, in the staff memo, I kind of went over that, but I also included some regulations from other towns within Connecticut. There really is a lot of differentiation between what towns require. I found towns that stick to the minimum of the 10%. I found towns that define it more broadly and actually require it when there's 25 parking spaces. I found towns where actually the make ready is only one part of it, and then they require either 3 or 5% of the stations to actually be installed. So the Connecticut general statutes under the zoning authority does permit the commission to enact zoning regulations that are permissive of electric vehicle charging and alternative energy. So there's the mandate of the 10%, but there's also the question beyond that of, does the commission want to explore anything beyond that 10%, whether it's either installing stations. There was a discussion previously about, the market, there is some self-regulation when it comes to EV charging stations. Some sites have installed them, some sites have not. I can see, depending on how our energy future works, there could be more demand for EV. There should be more demand for EV, likely. There are other, hydrogen fuel cell we've seen that's popping up again. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens over the next decade when it comes to propulsion for vehicles. But for now, electric vehicle is the primary dominant clean energy source when it comes to charging and comes to vehicle power. So what I proposed is, so what I have in front is, number one, is provided definition, so it's clear what EV charging is. I did include level 1 to understand what level 1 is. Again, level 1 charging is a trickle charge. They are a thing of the past pretty much now. You would only see them in a residential, and most residential would not install a level 1 charger in their garage because it would take their car 12 hours, 18 hours to charge. Yeah, most are charging under level 2 or level 3 direct current. So this requires either level 2 or level 3 direct current by the statute. So what I proposed is, number one, the definitions of what those charging stations are. And then from there, I have a regulation where it does require electric charging infrastructure. And this is pretty much kind of right out of the regulation or right out of the statute, that any new commercial or multifamily development with 30 or more designated parking spaces for cars or light duty trucks shall include electric vehicle charging infrastructure that is capable of supporting level 2 electric vehicle charging stations or level 3 fast charging stations and at least 10% of such parking spaces. Such infrastructure includes, but is not limited to, underground conduit, junction boxes, and adequate electrical supply. So at the last time it was brought up, there was a question about what adequate electrical supply. And I've had actually conversations with other planners, and CROG had a regional planning meeting that we were discussing online with other planners. And there was a lot of discussion about this. Most the municipalities out there view it as having adequate electrical design within the building as well. Because putting the infrastructure in for conduit does nothing if you have to go back and redesign an entire electrical system. We know how tough it's getting to actually get the equipment. And if they want to move forward, it's a larger investment later than it is up front when you're designing a system. But most towns do have that requirement. And I said a lot of towns have things beyond that, that they're actually requiring the actual heads to be installed for a certain percentage. So with this regulation and with the definition, I see that meets the requirements of the statute. So from there are items to discuss, those threshold regulations. What do we consider new construction? There was one that I pulled out from a regulation where they defined it in a more limiting sense, that new construction shall mean an addition and or new ground up construction. Designated parking spaces shall mean additional spaces required by the zoning regulation associated only with the new construction. It does not require existing parking spaces on the site to be counted in the 10%. That is not retroactive. So it's really looking at, okay, if if you were building a new building as an addition, and that new addition would require 30 parking spaces by itself, it would only be 3 parking spaces. It wouldn't be retroactive to the rest of the building on site and the rest of the parking. So from there, looking at different regulations, this is one from Groton. They went very far into defining each specific use and when what is required, but for them, it's demolishing an existing buildings and constructing a new building. It's also increasing the overall floor area, number of parking spaces or impervious surface area by more than 50%, or disturb more than 50% of the area of the existing site. So they have more restrictive regulations or more encompassing regulations that if someone was doing a remodel, disturbing 50% of the site or enlarging the building by 50%, the entire site would have to retroactively provide those charging stations, or they would have to be located and account for it. Say there was 100 spaces in the lot combined, now you would have 10. Versus if you were just adding those 30 or whatever you required, you'd have 3. From there, I think that might be the end. And then there's also, so that's kind of generally what we're looking at for the regulations. So a discussion regarding where's the threshold? Is the threshold new buildings period? Is it renovation? And at what point is the threshold? Is it 50%? So that's kind of the first question. I do have more additional considerations. So if you'd like me to pause there, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Woods?
So I'm gonna throw out an example that I think is good between brand new building and a building renovated. They're next door to each other on Payne Road, right? So the swimming pool lesson is brand new building. That's could be simple, right? Wherever the bases are, 10% need to be serviced. Now the one next door, while it is technically a renovation, it's a brand new building.
Mhm.
It doesn't even resemble remotely what was there before. So how would we classify that? I would think it would be new, not renovation. I mean, that's so this entire site's blown up. I'm not opposed to any of that, but
I believe on that site, they actually reduced the number of parking that was originally approved or kept it the same. So again,
Yeah,
it's,
because it moved from a commercial use more that had far more people visiting, of course, the nursery, to a to equipment rental, which really
but customer parking is down, but
Yeah.
parking spots are probably much higher. Depending on, or maybe not, maybe they just store the equipment in that backyard and it's just an open lot, so they're not in the spaces. So
Yeah.
it just would be the spaces on the west side, more than likely.
Yep, and the employee spaces counted towards it would probably go total for the total spaces they would need for that use. So yeah, that's, again, this is looking at it because likely if a developer comes in front of us, that would be a question.
So
When
I
does
like
this
the
apply?
50%. If you're disturbing more than 50% of either the parking or the building, then you meet new construction regulations. I think that's fair.
Yes. Commissioner Nafis?
My first question has to do with these EV sites. They're dedicated for electric vehicles. Nobody else can park it. Okay? Can electric vehicles park in them overnight? Are they like a space for an electric vehicle to take up, or is it simply a space for someone to go in, charge up, and then get out? Because I think what we're doing now is you're looking at our requirements are saying we need 30 parking spaces for this unit. Well, right away, we're taking away 3 of those for these EV spaces and nobody can use it. How are we going to address losing that amount of spaces? And if you extend that out to, okay, well, you got 100 now, you're adding 20. We want 12 more spaces, If we assume that our regulations requiring parking is correct, then don't we still want to have that amount of parking spaces available for whatever use is there? So that was a question I had.
And I think a lot of that depends on the operator of the site.
Right.
Because, and this doesn't, you could get pretty far into the weeds and thinking about how an operator could work on a site. It could be, for residential, it's going to be for the tenants. But on a commercial site, there's the opportunity that maybe they make it part of a charging network that is owned by a third party. And that happens common. That's very common, actually, that the actual owner of the property is the owner of the station and operates it. So they have the potential of, adding it to the map and someone driving through town who needs a charge to be able to pull in there. That's been very successful on actually Dunkin' Donuts, and food uses have used those the most. That's where actually, if you look at a lot of Tesla superchargers, they located those on those sites just because the dwell time and, actually most EV charging isn't done to 100%. It's kind of done along the way, and Teslas are a little more advanced in that they literally have it mapped out. The car maps it out for you, say, stop at this station, stop at this station, 20 minutes here, 20 minutes here, because you get a faster charge initially, and it's the top of the battery topping it off that takes longer.
That's not so much my question, is the fact that out of the 30 spaces we require for that use, 3 of them aren't available unless you're charging up your car. So we're losing 3 spaces that may be needed for that particular use. That's my question.
Yeah, and it works
How
under.
they use and who charges it, I'm
Yeah,
really
and
not
it
concerned with.
really works under the assumption that 10% of the vehicles out there will be EVs. That's what it works under the assumption. Again, this is the Clean Air Act passed by the state of Connecticut that mandated it, but I think it's an assumption that there will be 10% of vehicles or more on a site that require charging.
Commissioner Woods?
I'm gonna assume that the assumption also is the vehicles that are being charged either are employees or live or shopping at whatever facility.
Or tenants
right?
and,
Yeah, under residential, it makes, under commercial, it varies a lot by use. It's a very broad brush that the state painted this with. Some uses might not have as many people with EVs to stop by. Residential, yeah, I could definitely see that 10% of residential of having tenants. And actually tenants looking at new buildings and saying, hey, they have EV charging, great. I have an EV, I can actually rent here and this will work good for me. But, there might be some oddball uses out there that you don't get that many EV customers. Quick stop, type of uses that take very little time. That really, it might take a couple spaces offline, but that's just, again, it's a broad brush painted by the state for all commercial and multifamily uses.
Commissioner Minor, do you have a question?
Yeah, just a couple comments. I think the biggest challenge is gonna be on the high density housing is definitely going to be something in the future that we're gonna have to pay attention to. And I think there's also been consideration with a lot of the high density housing of reducing the number of spaces per unit because requirements just aren't there. So I think one kind of offsets the other to a certain degree in certain applications. But I definitely see where Alan's coming from is that you are potentially taking these out of service to not be able to be utilized by the general public. I don't know if it's a plus to an ad in a commercial environment versus high density. You leave it as it is because you're likely to have more usage there. Because if somebody's home on an 8 or 12-hour night at home to plug into a level 2 charger, they're gonna have top off and away they go in the morning. My only reservations are more, and I don't know if you want to pause it here, or if you want to get into the best. The best, I think, is a completely separate animal from this. This doesn't make me nervous. That makes me very nervous. So I think I would be more inclined to continue to keep the conversation going on the EV chargers and kind of slow down the best conversations, because I think you're gonna need a lot more information than you're gonna have right now in terms of what hazards and benefits are really there at this point. That's all I've got for right now.
Thank you. Commissioner Woods?
And the Public Act, again, requires the infrastructure,
Yep.
not the actual charging unit.
Correct.
So that makes it even weirder.
Yeah, it's,
Well, the definition,
Yeah.
that's a huge thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we can have a requirement in our regs that we could have a minimum of charging units workable.
correct.
I think that
So,
makes
I mean, I
sense.
think we need to think that through.
Yeah.
Because I think, for me, it makes more sense because, what's the sense in having the conduit and nothing to plug in, right? So you've got the capability in the building to get the power out, but you're missing that very important part,
And
Mr. Chair, because
their gas nozzle.
along those lines, is there any reason why the state didn't include that in there? I mean, that the other.
my guess,
Some reason.
it's a compromise.
Yeah.
It's a compromise really when you get out, because what it does is that's kind of a twofold of saying just the infrastructure, because by providing the infrastructure, you make it a lot easier to install the heads. You make it easy for a company to come in and You know, you could have a tenant right now who says, no, I have no demand for it. The building switches over to a different type of use, the infrastructure is there and they have a high demand for it. They have the customer base for it. It's easy to install the heads, it's ready to go. All they have to do is contract with a company who just installs them. So that's kind of there's a pro and con with that, and I think it's to just get things, I think the state's intent is to get things ready for it, is to find that middle ground of, okay, we're requiring sites to be prepared for this, but we're not making them make the investment. So property owners can still make the decision of whether, again, they want to reserve those spaces for EVs, or whether they feel they won't have enough right now, or they don't have enough tenants who have EVs to warrant it. You know, I could see a large multifamily development where right now they don't know that they need it. All of a sudden they have 5, 6, 7 tenants who say, hey, we really need this, and boom, they can put them right in place.
And for,
Commissioner Minor?
Yeah, just again, to carry along that, I think the biggest backbone concern for a property developer is gonna be the generation, the actual transformer for the site. And that makes a huge difference if you're gonna be adding in 10, 15 charging stations to 150 parking lot. You know, let's use 33 as an example. That would be a huge generation difference for what they would need versus what they would potentially have on site. And I think to piggyback along what Commissioner Woods was just saying, I think we really should consider having at least an initial set aside as an in place to be expandable up to the number that would be required if they were to pursue it. So I think that is the larger expense and concern to me, is actually the transformers than it is the actual heads and conduit to get there. So that's all.
Commissioner Woods?
I've been paying attention to DOTs. There's been up now for, I think, a little over a year, and there was very little use. Although if you're there now during the day, they're almost always full.
Yep.
Yeah, they're full.
All day, all night.
Yeah. So there is going to be a demand.
Yeah. And the same public act requires the state on any of their buildings to put in 20%. And you'll actually see on some of these, I reviewed it, there are some other municipalities that put in the school requirement, which is interesting, the 20% on the school.
School buses, yeah.
But actually not even the school buses. So actually the school building, the parking lots, and it's 20% for new school construction. When I looked at that, the actual public act language, and I traced it back to the specific state statute it was talking about the discretionary funding granted through the state for new construction for municipalities. So in our municipalities, you know, we're exempt from our zoning regulations. So that's originally why I didn't include the new schools 20%, because it's specific, it seems, to that funding source from the state. But the state required 20% for their own stuff right now, and that's very hard.
To Anna Reynolds, the state Office of School Construction Grants.
Yep.
Made us, you know, again, same as the state law. They don't have to be operable, but the infrastructure has to be in the building. Conduit has to be outside, so that, I mean, the school, the Board of Ed either decides to do it or makes a deal with somebody, an outside contractor, they can get installed.
Well, they just announced a grant, I believe, for CT Fast Track to start putting charging stations on the buses. So the buses are eventually gonna go all electric. And I heard they're gonna expand service out to, I think maybe Waterbury. So, you know, it's something in the future, it's gonna come this way. So I think, you know, let's try to get ahead of the curve a little bit, in my opinion. Get something in place that is a placeholder, we can either up it or down, reduce it. My opinion. Any other commissioner comments? Mr. Droz?
Just 2 quick points. One, maybe not quick. One was, when I did corporate America, I needed to install a 110 outlet on the far side of my parking lot. Enormous parking lot. My lights ran off of 440.
Right.
But the HV light pole had conduit. So it was peanuts for me to pay an electrician to disconnect the wire to one of my 440 lights, pull it through the conduit with a cable, connect the 110, and then run it back through the same conduit. So a lot of times the costly thing is what's underneath the pavement. And if you've got conduit there, it's nothing to run a snake through it. And even if it's a matter of disconnecting and pulling it through and then running the snake back through, that ends up being the difficult thing if we're talking new construction.
Okay.
And this point will be quicker. It was probably 6-8 months ago at this here that I was talking about the exponential increase in the sale of electric vehicles. Previous people here, there was some pushback as to what had to get done and do we really need to do this? It's a big expense. And I actually pulled up on my phone what the sales numbers were, and it's exponentially increasing to your point, Mr. Chairman. That having been said, on the news this past week was a survey of existing EV owners. 49% don't plan on buying another one.
Well,
And the reason being, the number one reason is range anxiety. So I would, and I'm not a voting member at the moment, I would be cautious as to going more than what the state regs are, because what you're doing is you're gambling on, is the technology going to fix the range problem, or is something like hydrogen going to then come out and then all the EV stuff is kind of a dinosaur? So I would be a little cautious. We're throwing money onto a regulation. We're kind of gambling as to what's going to happen 10 years from now. You know what I mean? So that's my only thought.
thank you, Commissioner. Anybody else? Commissioner, any other commissioners with comments? No? Oh. Where do you want to go? Want to have Paul draft something up?
I think you should start.
Yep. Yeah, as I said, I have those two items, again, the two that I showed with the definition and just the requirement for the 10%, that just meets the minimum standard. And I think the biggest question, and I think there was a little back and forth on it, is there a threshold under what's considered new? Or at least, once we get to the point where I'm proposing the regulation and there's hearings, that we make it clear that what is the threshold of what's new? Because I can see, depending on who's sitting in the seat, having a different interpretation.
So
Pascal, go ahead.
like the place that's, the restaurant that's going in where Bertucci was, what would you consider that? Because that's kind of a structure, like they're redoing the parking lot, right? There's a lot of.
It's a good.
Yeah, so on that one, yeah, it's a gut remodel,
Yeah.
and they're just, actually, they are reducing parking spaces.
Reducing parking.
To
Yeah,
put in
because they're putting in a patio.
to put in a large patio, so they would not be required. Even under something where you say, and I actually kind of like, the disturbance of 50% of the area of the site. It gives you a larger, if you have a very large property and a very small thing, you're not going to hit 50% of the site. But is it the developed site? These are these fine-grained things that are going to impact developers when they come in. And actually, I can say, and Eric has spoken with someone who is looking at putting in a fast food restaurant. And they actually asked us, they already had the EV stuff in there, and they were looking for where it was in our regulations, because they had just dealt with it in another community, and they're like, well, it's the requirement. And there was a little confusion from them when they were looking at regulations. Do you have more? Is it just the 10%? Because they know, a lot of them know it's out there now, that it is a state requirement. This is a shall item that we've been, told by the legislature, you shall do this.
Commissioner Claffey does have his hand raised as well.
Sorry?
Commissioner Claffey has his hand raised on.
Yes, Commissioner Claffey, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's fine. My two questions. One is to see how a lot of the stuff we do gets generated also by the building department, to see how they classify a gut rehab or reno where everything in the building has to go as new, versus they're putting an addition, a 10 by 20 addition on the side of the house going up 2 stories. Does that equate that the whole rest of the house has to be brought up to the new standard? And secondly, for the definition of, how much, and secondly, in our regulation for when we do like a parking lot renovation, what percentage do we use on that where the whole thing has to be, if they're going to move stuff? Don't I want to say I remember there's a number there if they came in for a site plan modification, and how do we differentiate that? Because that's kind of where some of these problems persist, because the charging stations are on the site plan and not specifically the building. So I remember in the site plan we had a certain number if you have to change completely everything, correct me if I'm wrong, or if they were just coming in for, hey, we have to move this drain line, but I still have to come in for a site plan approval. Remember, I want to say it was like that Brockett Street property where the eye doctor place is.
Yep, so the way, and if I'm thinking correctly where it is, so there's a distinction in our regulations of when something requires the full-blown site plan that comes to the commission, or whether staff can handle it administratively, and it's 10% of the building. So if you
Okay.
increase the building size by 10%, there's also when you change access to the site, if you're adding a new driveway, that comes to the commission as well. If you change the landscaping,
Reduce that.
reduce the landscaping and reduce the parking lot landscaping, or when you add additional parking. Those are the items that actually are in our regulations that say it comes to the commission. If it doesn't do those things, staff can handle it.
So that's why I asked that, because all of those charging stations are also tied in purely to the site plan, because the parking is part of the site plan based on the occupancy. So,
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
those numbers, you couldn't say, oh, if you're renovating 50% of the building, if someone's renovating over 50% of the building, there's probably a close correlation to the parking lot being renovated. That's just an assumption. I know we don't like to make it, but Commissioner Woods earlier in the meeting really nailed the point of those two properties on Payne Road. So I think it has to correlate with our number of site plan.
Yeah, and I think there could be some distinction between there too, because that 10% again is when it comes to you. Now, if someone was adding 20% on the building and we had a 50% threshold, this would not apply. So that, and the question is, what's up on the screen right there is that's like multiple different ways that they were looking at the 50%. We do not have to go that far in depth on every single aspect of it. And I could say from these are the examples too that have make ready and have a phased ones with stuff coming in 3% initially. They're probably a little too complicated by specific use, by specific that they have different for multifamily, they have different for mixed use, different for commercial, different for industrial. Like it's in depth more than I think we're looking to do in Newington right now.
Commissioner Minor?
I think with a lot of the aging building stock that we have, buildings like Bertucci's are gonna become more and more common of complete gut renovations, which to me is essentially exceeding 50%. My idea is 50% of the structure of the entire site is gonna be modified beyond 50%. And I think you're gonna see that more and more common because our open land is shrinking. So you're gonna see a lot of just out and out general renovations. I know, I don't remember what the threshold is, but I know that ADA is triggered on a dollar value renovation of a percentage of a commercial or industrial site.
That's through the building department,
But there's similar parallels that they have thresholds that, if you spend X amount of dollars on a $10 million project, that you triggered that threshold where you now have to bring it up to code or building code, same difference. So I think we should somehow see if we can at least link it in to some degree without being overly specific. But I think there needs to be some type of generalizations. And again, my biggest concern is on generation, that has to be clearly identified, that the developer has to consider 10% threshold of level 2 or level 3 charging, to be very specific to that, because otherwise you're gonna end up in a situation not being able to get transformers or having to change transformers, which are now becomes the property owner's expense, where it might have initially been Eversource bearing some of it.
Yeah, and the ability again to get that spec'd out right and get that transfer from Eversource is they're not likely to come back and be like, we just gave you one 3 years ago. No, you're paying the full boat.
Yeah,
That'd be a big expense for them. So that's why there is some advantage to doing it up front. It will be a little more expensive, of course. So the switchgear will probably be a little stronger. It'll be a little more upgraded of a system to be able to handle that. But if they don't go that route, they'll have an upgraded system that they could do other stuff with in the future. It's not something that is wasted per se on a building.
Remember, you're in the business of spending other people's money
Yeah, and that's why, and I absolutely understand that. That's why the question about, the make ready, installing stations now, it would be far more expensive to rip up the parking lot than it would be to upgrade the electrical.
But I think, as you alluded to before, I think there is benefit to saying, we're not gonna say you have to put 10% in today, but we need you to put in 3% or whatever, we deem as at least having an entry point, and you're gonna see the usage is gonna grow from there.
Yeah, and I think,
Provisions.
As Commissioner Droz said,
Provisions.
they come and go.
yeah, and I think it puts it into the hands of the property owner at that point to say, what is their actual need? So that's, mandating them is something that says, yes, this is our goal, we require them. Having all the infrastructure in place, as I said, getting the heads installed, just calling a company and then getting an arrangement with them, and I'm sure they would be happy if there was a site all ready for them and all they had to do is install the heads
Right.
and get the charging system going. But if they have a demand for it and their residents and has a demand, or their customers have a demand for it, it's easy to put them in.
Yes, Commissioner Pascarelli.
Just leading to this idea now that's a conversation about private property owners, commercial, residential. What about the town center? Should we begin to, I don't know, making a sort of a sort of ideal version of what we would like to see? We have some, and they're in Constitution Plaza, and they were paid for thanks to, Volkswagen, and their misdeeds. But, I think that, there's just two of them, right? I think at this point. And, it wouldn't hurt to start to consider other public locations and, maybe there's grants for those types of things. I mean, I think it's great. So I don't, I think the idea of, putting this in place for every scenario makes a lot of sense. I like the school idea too. I think we should, map that out a little bit. And, I don't know how it's, what the requirement should be, but maybe just a suggestion that we try to get to this level, by a certain date.
I think, in my opinion, that, this is gonna be something that's gonna be coming more and more in the future. We need to at least get something in place now. So we'll see what the commission wants to do. Any other, yes?
But I agree with that David saying that, we gotta get something in place, but what I'm hearing here from everybody is that there's gonna be more need for this, and it's gonna cost them so much more that they come back and have to put the conduit and the transformer and all this other stuff. Don't you think that the developers out there are thinking that, and that, as they come in looking at things, your persuasion might tell them to do even more than what we're requiring?
Yeah, there would be nothing stopping a developer saying, okay, I want to put 15, I want to put 20, I want to put in the actual heads.
Right,
Great.
but I guess my point being is that they must be thinking about this as well, because they're, looking at either their residents or their
Mhm.
customers.
Yeah.
So hopefully it won't be an issue. We can start, like they say, at the 10%, and hopefully it grows from there.
I think when we approved, the year there, we approved all those multifamily, we asked each one to install some stations. I believe there was one just flat out said, no, I'm not going to, but the others all agreed to, some form or another.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Commissioner Hoffman.
one thing that I keep getting thrown back and forth on is that it seems like we're on the knife's edge of EV, non-EV. It could go either way. If the batteries become better and you can get the range, more people are gonna buy them. If they don't, people are gonna start selling them or trading them in or doing something else and going back to gas. What about the possibility of saying, let's hedge our bets and say, you gotta put in 20% provisions. Fill 10 of that with heads. So that if we do go more EV, we have more availability. They're already in there. All you gotta do is pull wire. You have the capacity already made. You may not have to use it, but what if you're gonna have to use it? Give them an area where you have to have this amount, or you have to have maybe double that amount as provisions, depending on how the environmental and EV situation goes.
Commissioner Fox?
Yeah, I was thinking something on the same line as Commissioner Hoffman was, but another thing intrigues me regarding EV environmental is something that Commissioner Rose had brought up. Hydrogen fuel cells are kind of in the background, kind of, in the back of your mind. But I think with between climate change and everything else that's going on as far as the environment is concerned, maybe picking up pretty soon, but picking up a lot. And I think I've always been kind of a proponent of hydrogen fuel cells, and I think that would kind of lower the consumers' requirement for EVs. So it's kind of a complicated thing. It gets to be a little tough.
Thank you.
You're
Anybody else have any other comments?
We have one.
Yeah. Yes, Commissioner Woods.
Where's Eversource on all this? Right?
I haven't heard anything from it, no.
You think they should be part of this conversation, because there's gotta be a max that they can handle. I mean, the grid's can only handle so much. Right. That's helpful.
Yep, well, I would say this, I would hope the legislature talk to them when passing this law, the Clean Air Act, but
Well, they just raised everybody's rates.
That's a reality.
But it's not the raises, you have to have the power to generate.
Right.
so I'll just kind of read it. So what it's, yeah, and actually, so there's a couple other considerations too. And these ones that popped up, again, requiring chargers, we kind of talked about for certain amount of spaces. There's one that is kind of out there in left field, but I've actually had this happen in another municipality where someone wanted to come and put EV stations and they had large LCD screens on them.
Yeah.
They were using them for advertising. That either should, maybe, do we want to define that in the regulations? There's some that do permit it. There's some that say no. There's some that say, okay, you can't see them if you can't see them from a right of way or a main drive area, public area, it's not an issue. So, what is the commission's concern regarding signage and LCD screens on these things?
Commissioner Woods?
How do we regulate it with gas stations?
They're gonna say they're already doing it.
Yeah,
Yeah, so do we regulate it? I don't think we do.
We do, but clearly has no regulations about, no motion, all that kind of stuff. So, some of these are as big as small TV screens. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
the ones at the gas station,
Yeah.
big as your fist.
No, they're getting much bigger
Yeah.
now. Yeah, they're getting to be 12,
They are.
15-inch screens now.
yeah, it's whether that.
And I don't think it's screened as much as these obnoxious voices.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
So if that's something that you would like to include in there, you can leave it silent on it, and then we can go back to our sign regulations, and that's what I did in the previous municipality that just said, no, we don't allow digital signage.
That's just my opinion.
If I may,
Sorry, yes,
yeah,
Commissioner.
they have them in gas stations, that's fine, that's kind of a confined area. We're talking about
Yeah.
residential areas,
Right.
regular commercial, I would say you probably don't want that.
Yeah.
Okay, any other discussion? Okay,
Yep, and there's other ones that has maintenance and accessibility as part of it too.
Maintenance.
There's some who specifically say they shall be maintained. It kind of goes without saying. Regulations do this from time to time.
That's so hard to enforce.
Yeah, it's.
It is.
Zero enforcement.
Yeah, it's very hard to
Eric's
enforce.
got a hard enough job as it is.
Yeah. So I'll kind of reiterate what it sounds like is, what I can do is I'll come forward with some options. Kind of the basic that I put in, which, those are the items that were the two first ones, definition, and that item 1, which are the minimum requirements. And then come up with something that is, if it's a little more progressive, requires an additional amount. And then see what I can kind of come up with that and bring it to you guys at the next meeting or the meeting after, depending on how work goes. And then kind of keep moving this thing forward.
Right.
From staff's point of view, adopting the bare minimum is required for compliance with this public act. So that's where staff is coming from, again, to be compliant with state statute. What we do beyond that is up to the commission.
thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Move over to solar alternative energy.
Okay, so the first item on this is, we brought up previously, is the battery energy storage systems, also known as BESS. We have been approached by someone who's looking to put one of these into a property. you can kind of see in the staff memo, I kind of laid out a lot of the information from that APA article, the zoning practice, which actually came out in March, so it's pretty recent. And I did some research out there as well. I have spoken with, and you can kind of move along to the next one. So I have actually spoken to the siting council. Right now, there is a little bit of a question regarding, there's a requirement at the siting council that, again, they electric generating or storage facilities, excluding generating devices, cogeneration facilities of 25 megawatts or less, and facilities fueled by renewable energy sources of less than 1 megawatt. So the question is, I did speak again with the siting council. There are some opinions that battery energy storage solutions, systems, no matter what their voltage is, no matter what their capacity is, should be under them. When going to the developer side, the company who's looking to install these, they have their representatives who have looked at it, well, no, this is under that renewable energy sources, and therefore it's under 1 megawatt. They have been, I think it was asked at the last meeting to see what have other municipalities done. I got a list of municipalities that this energy company is looking to put into, and some of them have been approved. And there are planners who looked at it and said, listen, it's really no different than a generator, according to them, on what the use is, what it does. It provides energy backup to the building, but it also provides additional stability to the grid. The more of these that pop up, again, there are concerns with the safety aspects of it, but the more of these that pop up, the more stabilization of the grid overall throughout the town. So there is some benefit. And what we're really looking at so anything over 1 megawatt or over 1 megawatt is going to go to the siting council. When it goes to the siting council, it does not come to us for local approval. It comes to us for local comment. I get these letters from the siting council. They don't come to the commission because most of them are pretty much Verizon is swapping out a 4G for a 5G antenna. We look at it, no increase in height, knowing that, okay, not an issue. If there were special requirements, we'll look at it, okay, it did get approved municipally, it's attached to a building, but they're not changing any of the height, they're not changing that. We just go, okay, no comment. A lot of the siting council stuff comes back, no comment. It's when you get larger facilities that, if we did get a large facility, say a 20 megawatt, and they wanted to locate it on one, I would inform the commission and say, okay, this is our chance to comment on it in front of the siting council. And they do take those as part of their interrogatories. I included a bunch of items on the staff report that have been recently in front of the siting council for about 4 or 5 megawatt. There's a company, I think in Durham, who's been coming through and putting those throughout the state. Now, some of those are actually on industrial properties in the front of the property close to the road. However, it's a siting council jurisdiction and the town can provide comments, but ultimately the siting council makes the final decision. So under megawatt, what would that look like for Newington? So about 740 square feet of ground area is what I kind of measured. So it's not a large area that you're looking at. And the battery equipment only takes about 165 square feet within that, because that 740 includes the battery equipment, the setbacks away from it, and the fence around it in the enclosure area. So from there, really what we're looking at is this would be considered one of those systems that's under 1 megawatt. Just to provide an example, and I thought it was a good picture too, because you can see the transformer next to it.
Like a big generator.
Yeah, it is. It's
know it from a generator.
yeah, you really wouldn't know it looking at it.
I think it's a generator.
Yeah, yeah,
Until one thing happens.
yeah. And again, they are in multiple cases, and this is throughout cities, throughout towns, throughout the country, they are installed close to buildings. There are minimum setback requirements, but depending on what code that state is under, they can get installed closer to buildings. My main concern is, okay, you have it close to the building, that's their risk, my main concern is what's next to them and how close are they putting it to another site, especially a residential or a dwelling use.
Quick
Mr.
question.
Jones, go ahead.
It might just be as much for Commissioner Minor as it is for Mr. Dixon. What's the fire potential for these, knowing that there's some brands of cars that tend to
I'd like to take this one right off the bat.
Do we have equipment to put these out
Huge.
based on size?
No,
Like,
here's the problem, and this is not a Newington problem, this is a national, this is a worldwide problem. When these catch fire and get going, they do not act like a traditional fire. A traditional fire, you extinguish with either foam encapsulating it, cutting off the oxygen, no more fire. Water cooling it, no more fire. In this session, when these batteries get going, they catch the next cell and everything is run in series and in parallel. And that's when you have what's called thermal runaway. At this point, the state fire marshal's office, federally, nobody has a good handle on how to deal with these in the environment that they're being put in. And as Paul had in his memo to us, there's only been 12 fires of these. And I think, correct, in the last 8 years, 9
Yeah,
years, somewhere
that's what
around
they
there?
had in the APA.
But 7 of those have occurred since last year. So as the numbers are increasing, we're seeing it increased. We actually had the privilege of going last year down to FDNY, New York, hosted an EV, basically dealing with EV, that about 10 members of Newington's department went down and talked to those guys one-on-one, which were living it in the real world. And they are having a huge problem with lithium ion battery fires, especially not so much in large scale this way, but what they're having as the e-bikes have gone and increased, they're having a lot of bootleggers that are now, you drop off your battery this afternoon and I give you a new one. Now you suddenly have these illegal charging stations within a storefront or within a building that have got way more load than was ever anticipated. And they unfortunately had a pretty serious fatal fire 2 years ago that resulted. And they're experiencing it. Their hazmat team has to deal with them, and they have at least 1 to 3 a day. Severity ranges throughout a week. So they're definitely going to become more prevalent, hands down. A lot of people are buying them so they can store the energy provided to them from solar generation during the day. And they're actually able to sell it to the grid at peak, where they get the most amount of money return, or they can hold it for their own reserves and act as backup generation in the event of a grid failure. So there's positives, but I think the bigger concern I have, and why I'm reluctant at all to even touch this, is there is not a way to control the safety aspect, public safety aspect of this currently, right now. And I think you'll get the same response back as you get I don't think you even got a response back from DG or the state, because I don't think there is one yet.
Yeah, I think, and to answer that, yes, I have asked DJ. He has been corresponding with the state fire marshal, and he has not heard back on that one. I did a little research, and especially in this article, and I've asked the question. So I've asked the question to our building official about NFPA 855. That is specifically a code specifically to battery energy storage, static energy storage. I think that was the letter, the wording of it. And DJ is checking into whether that applies on the state fire code as well. The ones I noticed at the siting council level, I read through their applications. I read through all of them, NFPA 855. So at least at the siting council level, they've all been held to that standard, and that's pretty much the national standard when it comes to these systems with setbacks, with controls for potential thermal runaway, for systems that are in it. And they've actually, a lot of the fires actually happened in New York in 2023, in a series of that one. Now, everyone's blaming each other. Battery manufacturers are blaming the installers. And a lot of these, Tesla actually has one of the better track records. The ones that were having big issues, and they've stopped doing it for the most part, is when they put them in shipping containers, it became even worse. So they've moved away from it. Like, as you can see the one on the screen, now they're out on themselves. They're easier to deal with. It's easier to see. When they're in the shipping containers, I think it just exacerbated the fire, exacerbated the issue. So that's what I'm looking for answers on too. So the people who have been in contact with me said they are willing to come to the TPZ under a pre-application or under something on that for that, and to discuss the safety issues of it and to answer questions. And, they've met with staff. They're happy to talk to the fire marshal. And I said, there are some municipalities who already did approve these. And there are other ones that I've talked to, planners out there, who were, the main concern is actually proximity to residential. That really is our main concern, If it's on an industrial or commercial site, and it's set far back and away from the building, if there is an issue, it likely is contained. If it's close to a residence, that's when, you know, we get the most concern. That's where our regulations are the tightest. It's that interface between commercial and residential to protect the residential. So they're willing to come and actually speak with the TPZ. If that's something that you're interested in, we could have them come in and talk about the safety aspects and kind of answer that, because they're the engineers who work on this.
Commissioner Woods?
Yeah, I got a question for Commissioner Minor. So what is the protocol for a fire for these? Just let them,
Let it burn.
just burn them out?
Let it
Let 'em go.
Let them go?
Yeah.
Let 'em
And
go.
just protect the area around it?
Just like on a car.
Protect your, you know, protect your exposures and let it go. I mean,
It's just funny
there's
because you
been,
wouldn't think they would locate them. Well, I guess.
If I had my choice.
You have no choice,
yeah,
right?
that would
And-
not be my choice.
And there are internal systems on a lot of these. You know, there are examples, and it was noted in the article too, that not every thermal event causes a runaway. Some of the runaways are stopped by the systems that are within the BESS. So some of them do come specifically with fire suppression, that at least if something starts smoldering, it shuts everything down and it stops it from becoming a full-blown fire.
So the runaway is worst case.
But that's, as a general rule with lithium ion, that's what happens. I mean, unless they're, you know, the technology has changed now, or it's allowing it to be isolated or creating a break, maybe that's how they're handling it. I mean, in a normal setting, if you were to look at, you know, high-end computer equipment, they generally, if you look at somebody's server room, a lot of rooms use halon. So halon basically takes the oxygen out of the air, which kills the fire in the room, and that's it. In this setting here, regardless, the only other argument you'll get, and some fire departments have it, is copious amounts of water. And that's just in an effort to cool the cells so they don't continue to run away, but there's no extinguishing to it, per se.
I have a question, Commissioner Minor. What is the environmental issues on this? If you
It's-
start drowning with water, I mean, does that?
It's huge because you've now created runoff, which is essentially going into wherever. So,
Correct.
you know, is there a way to have it in a containment bin? I've heard of, you know, some towing companies have actually installed storage containers that are open in the top. So when these wrecks come in, they'll actually raise them up into the storage containers. If they catch fire again, all they do is add water to it, which is contained within the container. And then they have an environmental contractor come in after the event's over, remove all the contaminated water, and it's solved. So, I mean, there are, you know, could you put it in containment areas? I mean, there's 100, I'd be curious to hear what the engineers or the company proposing has to say about those types of things, for
Because
sure.
you can't use foam on this, am I correct?
It doesn't work.
Okay.
Because oxygen, foam is essentially encapsulating it, so it doesn't allow the oxygen. With that, it's irrelevant because it doesn't need it.
But I mean, you can't use foam because of PFAS, or is there?
But no, the PFAS is all gone. We
Okay.
don't use it anymore. It's actually outlawed in Connecticut, so
Alright.
we've used a different type of foaming agent. It's not got PFAS in it
Okay,
anymore.
just want
I
to make sure.
think you could have fire without oxygen, but these.
Yeah, with
these are
these,
exceptions to the rule.
yep, they don't care. They continue to burn.
Any other questions?
So I'll kind of continue through if I could, Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry?
I'll kind of continue. I have a couple more items.
Okay.
On this. So again, I have another example. This is kind of off the back. This is again, just to show the size of the system that would be, that they're looking at. You can see it relative to a utility truck next to it. And then going forward. So again, these are my questions. Are we looking at this as an accessory use? There is a desire, and this is actually the company who's talked to me, to put it in front of the building. Because there is a desire, as you can see, well, in the previous photo where you saw the truck, they put it right next to the utility pole. That has to do with loss, that has to do with the equipment they need. Our regulations do not permit accessory structures within the front yard. I don't have an issue with it, not, you know, if it goes to the siting council and it's a larger installation, there might not be anything we can do about the front yard on a site. If it's within your jurisdiction, we have regulations in place that says that the front yard shall not be used for accessory buildings. If I would consider this accessory building in use, if we look at it that way. Is it its own use? We have another use for special permits that's more talking about utilities, but I see that as a larger utility infrastructure,
So,
or like a
Paul,
substation.
How do we view like pump station for MDC or cellular outbuilding for cellular? How do we view those? Are they exempt because of public utility?
If they were independent on their own on a site, it would be the primary use. If a company came in and just said, okay, I'm putting a small, cellular thing on the side of the building and a small little cabinet on the side of it, that's just incidental to it. So I think if it's primary and how prominent it is
So
kind
if
of
I were
makes a
to
difference.
break off a chunk of my property, I've got 10 acres, I'm gonna break off a quarter acre, a half acre, because I wanna put on a solar, or let's say I'm gonna use half of my site for a solar array. I wanna put in an outbuilding for the bus equipment. How would that be considered
If it
an
was,
outbuilding or?
yeah. If it was on a site by itself and not accessory and subordinate to a primary use, we would consider it a primary use in itself and probably bring it under the utility aspect of it.
So if I decide to break it apart, I
Yeah.
could kind of circumvent it going that way.
Yeah, but if it's part of this, when we get into the solar part of it, I have Richard Street, for example, that was approved as a site plan mod. It was accessory and subordinate to the main industrial use. So that's kind of when we're looking at these battery energy storage solutions, they really have been viewed by most planners and mostly across the state as an accessory use. It does fit it there like a generator. There is the safety concern with it, but there can be with generators too when they're operating. It can happen,
Yeah.
not as often, but
Not even in the
Yeah.
same spectrum.
Yeah.
I'll deal with a generator fire all day long.
It's like, mechanical, exterior mechanicals for
Or,
zoning
yeah.
regulations, in the rear of the house or in the side yard, 5 feet from the structure.
Right.
5 feet from the property
Right.
line, no more than 10 feet from the
Right.
property
Yeah.
line.
So again, you may have an applicant who comes in front of you and says, I want to put it in the front. I have kind of told them that our regulations do not permit that. And, this is part to talk to get a kind of determination that if the TPZ feels the same way, that these things should not be in the front of a property. We'll continue that way, but there is a desire to put them as close to the pole as possible, so they'll be pushing for it.
Mr. Minor?
Honestly, I'd rather have it there. If it's way away from the structure,
Mhm.
close enough, yet far enough from the utility poles themselves to not be a direct risk, I'd rather shield it with landscaping and call it a day. Its risk is going to be less that way. But again, now you're into containment. If you were to have an event, how do you contain it? Because now you just lost control.
Commissioner Woods? Oh, sorry,
I have a question.
Commissioner Casserole.
Do we anticipate these units being installed in mostly commercial or industrial areas? I mean, do we anticipate homeowners wanting to put one in? I think that's where we're kind of getting into the thing of where we want to.
Most of the homeowner systems would not even fall under our jurisdiction. When we get into solar, we'll talk about that. Roofs right now, it's just a building permit. We don't have any special zoning permit. And then on top of that, you can actually view the Tesla power walls inside houses are best. They're
Yes.
just a small version of it because the houses do not generate the level of electricity that would require a BESS of this size. But they are battery energy storage solutions. They're in houses now. They're in buildings now. They're in a lot of places. And, they have some of the same risks as well, but they've been controlled by the building code, fire code, and they're out there. So homeowners can have them in their garages and, zoning typically does not extend into someone's garage in their use. So that's kind of for your electrical setup. So those are regulated by building code. So I see homeowners are adopting it more on the ones who have, especially the houses that have, larger EV systems on the roof, larger solar systems on the roof, to be able to do this, to store the energy, and it's their energy backup. It's their generator for the house. And you have the multiple systems where you have solar on the roof, your own Tesla Powerwall, and an electric car, where they're now all connected, where not only the Powerwall charges the car at off peak and does that, but the car back connects through everything, and your house can run for days when the power's out with a combination of the Powerwall and your car. There's been some estimates. We were actually looking at this. I was talking with my family of all people over dinner about it because people are looking at the interesting that, finding stuff that 7 days. Sometimes if you have the car and the Powerwall, it's a whole week that you can exist with being disconnected from the grid.
Mr. Chair, just one question here. When you talk about having 12 fires in the 7 or 8 years or 7 in the last 2 years, That's, I mean, it's probably a stupid question, but how many units is that out of?
Yeah.
I mean, you really can't determine risk based on a number like that without knowing, you know, if there's
I think
7,000 of them out there.
Yeah, I think you'll find is they've really come into play. We heard grumbling, we went 2 years ago on our training. There was just some initial conversation of them seeing them, for lack of a better term, in the wild. They really, you know, they knew they were out there, but they weren't out there very much. And the same thing with residential. In the last 12 to 24 months, you've seen that. You know, I know people that have had solar for years, and I know just talked about one yesterday, and he said, yeah, I just put it in last
we're
week.
in that same situation, but I'm just curious to,
How many are there?
because this is across the country we're talking,
Yeah,
right?
and I'll just correct the record that there was 22.
Across the
But yeah, but still across the country, if you're looking at it, because California has a lot. And actually they're going to be installing even more. Because right now they're in something that's called the duck curve when it comes to their power generation, that during the middle of the day, solar is generating more power than they can actually use and even store. And I think it's annually they're throwing away enough energy to power San Francisco for an entire year. So it's, you know, that's the level. So they're going to be pushing. So we're going to see this, I think, more and more, especially solar on most of our commercial rooftops is there. Target has it, you know, we have these large solar fields that are on rooftops. Eventually it'll catch up to our grid, and then battery storage will be the way it moves. And there's incentives out. So the reason why this is really showing up a lot right now is the Connecticut Green Bank is providing incentives out there, and there's other incentives provided by the state that are making this more viable for companies to come in and install. And of those fires too, looking back, 7 were in 2023, and I know at least 3 of those from reading an article were in one place in New York from one manufacturer. So that was more of a manufacturer issue than anything else. And in talking with the companies, there are some manufacturers out there who did have issues. They tended to go with Tesla because they have a better record as far as that. But you do have these ones that are slightly off brand, or what they used to do is LG would produce the cells, sell the cells, someone else would put it together and someone else would install it. Right now, LG made the commitment after the New York fires to actually control everything, produce the cells, assemble the unit, so they had control over it because they didn't want their name being dragged through the mud for the fires. So I think it's advancing, but we're going to see BESSes, and we're going to see interest in them. This is the first one I've seen, but there actually is a BESS now. It's part of the Richard Street. They do have a battery, they have a BESS on that site.
Any other questions?
So again, the issues and concerns, as we noted, fire protection. I'm still waiting for some stuff back from the fire marshal to see what they've discussed. The applicability of NFP 855, I think, is big. And making sure that so again, while it's not part of the building code, making sure it's part of the state fire code, and that this will be regulated under that. Because again, the siting council has that requirement. Everything that goes in front of them appears to be meeting that requirement. I don't want a lower threshold than the state, and how they're viewing these applications. And then again, the setbacks from the buildings will be a big question. There is minimum on fire code, but is there a concern other places? Right now, there really aren't many regulations out there. New York has pushed ahead with it. They have their own model regulations, but Connecticut right now, I couldn't find a town that talked about BESSes.
It's too new.
Yeah, and I think when we get towards the end and talking about alternative energy, we have some Hartford's regulation where they generally do their things that would be all utilities, but they would affect fuel cells and BESSes. And they had a couple recommendations and setbacks from there. And then again, screening that applies more that, okay, if the commission was okay with these being towards the front of a property closer to the utility, what's the level of screening that we would require? I think we would, want it to at least blend in and not just be this utility structure and seeing these over and over again, all in front of properties. So that's kind of my question for, to get it out there for discussion. And if you would like, I could have the representative from the company come in here and discuss it. And they could even discuss the site that they're looking to put it on as well.
What's the commission's pleasure on that?
I think it'd be a good idea.
What to say?
Of course, it's all gonna be, Commissioner Hoffman, I think it's all gonna be roses on their end, because they're not gonna wanna talk about the downsides. So, that's might be a time where we can kind of ask them about the downsides
Right.
and how would they approach it.
Mhm.
So I think it would be a good idea to have them come in. And it's gonna be a long meeting. Don't plan anything else.
So you have the direction, Mr. Planner.
All right. So I think from there was at the end of the Besses.
Anybody online or any questions on that? No? Okay. Commissioner Clapp, you all set?
Yeah, I'm all set. No worries.
Thank you. All right, next is, any old business?
So we have,
We got part two.
yeah, part two.
Part two, okay.
So that's the Besses. All this is tied together. But we do also have potential applicant who's looking to install ground mount solar at an industrial facility. But what I want to do is talk about, and I kind of mentioned this at our last meeting, solar in general. So right now, we permit it as, it's not in the regulations, but it's been permitted as an accessory use. So for residential, of course, for rooftop installations for residential, it's only a building permit. They're just reviewed, they meet it. Most solar installations on a roof are very tight to the roof with minimum clearances. I think we haven't seen an issue with it. And there are, I've attached some regulations. You see multiple towns when they choose to do regulations, they do include it. And they'll say, can't exceed above 5 feet above it or anything. That's something to think about, that if the TPZ would like to go down the route of generating regulations for this. Ground mount for residential, right now it's a zoning permit and a building permit. As long as it meets the accessory setbacks and the yard requirements, the small system has gone in, and I think there's been 2 that have been. So for commercial, again, rooftop installations, building permit only. For ground mounted has been a site plan and a building. So just to highlight I don't think there's any other large solar arrays. I looked around on the map. This is pretty much our one large solar array. But again, it does fall under that 1 megawatt requirement. So this was a TPZ approval because it fell under the siting council's requirement of the 1 megawatt of the generating. And you can see 1 megawatt, 756 kilowatts does still take up a decent amount of a site when you're talking about solar panels. So this was approved as a site plan modification as accessory to the principal use. Now for backyards, I just put some example. This is not the ones that are installed. Just want to show an example. There are multiple different ways to install solar in yards. You can install them close to the ground. You can install them on poles. This is more, this is actually what I see most in Vermont. These single poles put cross yards everywhere. But it's ubiquitous. Again, we don't have them in too many yards here, but there may be interest to do so. So right now, we view them as accessory to the residential use. There's nothing talking about size. We just hold them to those requirements of the accessory, not over 15 feet in height and at least 5 feet back from the property lines. But I'll get into, there's different regulations out there that were attached to the staff report. So part of this interesting, when reviewing this, again, effective July 1st, this was just passed. The state didn't decide to give breathing room between when it was effective and not. However, they're really looking at encouraging solar canopies for both, for pretty much any type of use, residential, commercial. It's odd language that they chose to use. Again, this is the municipality shall amend any regulation adopted pursuant to subsection A, section 8-2, which is the zoning of the general statutes, to establish a simplified approval process for any application to build a solar canopy. There's no definition of what a simplified process is. Of course. Right now, our process is, it's accessory and it actually is pretty simple. You just come in for a permit. But what are these solar canopies that we're really looking at? So you have nice small ones that are part of a carport structure, you know, this would be a normal carport structure that would be installed on a property. You have other ones that again are used for shades. They're the same solar structure, solar canopy, but sometimes they are used for recreational purposes. Again, shade in the backyard. It takes the place of, you know, a pop-up tent or a gazebo or something in your backyard, that there are people who use this as well. So that this would also fall under solar canopy. So for commercial uses, you know, you see, you know, single banks installed like this that are over parking spaces. And then you have larger areas that take up the majority of a site's parking lot. So I think it's looking for a discussion of what the commission views these uses, where we should put them. Again, this is early on in the discussion. We do have someone who is interested in putting them on a property. They would potentially be ground mount. It's an industrial property where I would encourage them actually to maybe utilize this part on the existing pavement that's there. Because there are runoff concerns. You know, you are creating more impervious area and concentrating runoff. It's normally in a grass area, but that's something to think about. So the considerations for the regulations when we're looking at all of these type of systems. So for solar, for roof or ground mounted, for wind, for roof or ground mounted, and geothermal. There are municipalities who just define geothermal. It is rare because it's mostly underground. The regulation that I've seen kind of common that mostly would be covered under the building permit. But I did want to include that in here because it is part of the alternative energy. As of now, I haven't seen too many issues with geothermal.
Just like a well.
Yeah. You know, some people just say, okay, it can't near be a potable, it can't be near that, but building permits can typically cover most of that. So I don't see the big need to regulate geothermal at this point. But the question is, at what thresholds do we do with something by zoning permit, site plan, or special permit? And then setbacks, the height, the stormwater runoff, maintenance and decommissioning, that also applies to the BESS as well. I've seen some large BESS and some large systems that they say, okay, what's your decommissioning plan? And they may actually have to make them on these 5 megawatt larger, or even I've seen, you know, examples of 50, 60, 100 megawatt installations out there. And they're required to have a decommissioning plan because at some point these cells lose their effective life. They're better than they were as far as loss in the past, but at some point, okay, does someone walk away? I'm not as concerned with a smaller unit. A large installation, yeah, that's a large amount of heavy metals and everything that's just sitting on a site that if someone just decommissioned it and walk away, it's just sitting there. And then noise. Noise for the BESSes is primarily talking about the gear when it switches on has a specific hum to it, and then also any cooling that would be associated with it.
Paul, I have a question. And the largest solar farms, like there's one in Berlin over the line, and there's one at Manchester Community College. They're all fenced in. Now, something big like that, what would be our requirement? Would we require them to be fenced in for safety?
So on the Richard Street site, I don't believe they are fenced in, but they're in back of an industrial property. There really isn't much.
Right, yeah, they're fenced in.
Oh, they are? They all fenced?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Feel that's.
I correct. So they are. And actually, I saw that that was on one of the BESSes. There was a question about being fenced in and their own engineers said, well, it doesn't need to be fenced in, but we're doing it for safety reasons. I think they should be fenced in. It prevents tampering, you know, it doesn't prevent, but it makes it harder. You can't just walk up to it and whack it, that type of thing, or mess with it. Or,
Kids climbing on it.
yeah, kids climbing on it, or kids trying to open it up and mess with it. So I think fencing would be a good idea.
And then just so we're aware too, if it, with the BESSes or whatever, if you do allow them in the front yard, most of our regulations for fence height can't exceed 6 feet in the front yard. It's
4 feet.
4 feet in the front yard, so.
Then you could do screening, though, you could.
Yeah, so just, it's,
Well,
keep in mind, if we're gonna require fencing, then we gotta deal with that.
My other question would be, I would want safety, some type of ballard system in there.
Mhm.
Cars have a tendency to find houses. I don't know how, but they do find them. So I would be concerned if somebody drove into one of those, you know?
Yep.
So I mean, that would be another consideration.
That would be a huge consideration though for the installer, because now you're adding considerable expense. If you're trying to keep cars out, now you're talking 5 foot on center, and some of these sites are huge. I've never seen bollards on one of these larger sites.
Not on a larger.
I think I'd be more concerned with the Besses than I would be with a solar array. If you had a
Right, well,
solar
that's
array
what
on
I'm
the
referring to,
field.
that's just what I was.
Yeah,
referring to
yeah,
on that.
solar array. I
You know,
wouldn't
solar
be-
array, I'm just concerned with kids, you know, especially on the weekends, if they're in a commercial building or commercial property and they start messing with them. I don't know what would happen. Like I said, I happen to see the one in Manchester. I go out there sometimes and I see they're from the highway, they've got fencing all the way around, and that's a huge farm. And same with the one down on over the line in Berlin. So I mean, I just want to make sure that whatever way we go on this, the public is protected.
Mhm.
That's all I'm concerned with here.
So right now, and this is the kind of question of, do we continue to stay the course? Actually, I think you have another.
Oh, I'm
Question.
sorry. Yes, Commissioner Rose.
Just an observation with the definition, and thank you for the pictures of solar canopies. How would that end up being any different than the existing previous pictures of solar panels on a post? It's 4 posts versus 1 post. I would think it would still fall under building permits of where can you put a carport? Okay, you've got solar panels on the top. Or you showed one of a condo complex with the big solar, but that would all be part of like a building permit thing. My only question with all that would be, has anyone actually looked at the glare coming off of these and where that goes? Obviously, it depends on time of day and time of year. Are you now, you're giving the person on the 3rd floor a 5th-degree burn in June, or even worse, you end up blinding motorists that happen to be going past and these solar panels are going at just the wrong angle on just the wrong month. That's, what's that?
Like the gold.
Exactly. So that would be my observation as far as structures. I don't know how that would be any different than what we currently have based on accessory structures and building permits and that type of thing. The only thing no one's mentioned yet is reflection on those big,
I don't think they do anymore. I think all the new ones don't reflect.
They used to.
non-reflecting.
They used
Okay.
to. Yeah,
Okay.
now
They're more
they're-
matte
they're
now.
just trying to take all the-
Yeah, and
They have them all over Wesleyan. Like, none of them give off any kind of. reflection at all.
yeah, because I do remember 10 years ago or so, there was a homeowner suing another homeowner because it melted their siding.
Right.
But that's just it occurs actually more with glass buildings than anything else, and large windows do a bigger reflection.
Yeah.
Yeah, where you have 2 houses next to each other and just the way it hits it, it can actually melt another person's siding. That has happened, but I haven't seen too much on the glare. It's something I can see, because as we look into this and look at,
Right.
and the big question is, do we want to keep going how we're going with just, it's not defined, we just consider an accessory use and deal with it when it comes in front of it, or do we want to actually define it in the regulations?
Commissioner Woods? Yeah, I think we need to define it, and I'll throw out 2 ways that we could. We either do it by limiting the size or limiting the size to the lot, so, and I guess we need to talk about that to see which is the better way to go, because you're gonna see the Walmarts, they're gonna start wanting to put these in the parking lot. They've got, acres and acres and acres of power line. If they could turn that into making energy, there's savings and there's money to be made, they're gonna do it. Walmart, Target, all of them.
Yeah, and the biggest issue with those Walmarts and that kind of like the picture stuff, right now with their accessory, if they came in, they said Walmart here, pretty much most of the stuff on the Berlin Turnpike. Classic strip development along a major road, parking's all in front. That's where you have our regulations now. If someone came and said, I want to put a solar there, I'd be like, it says no accessory structures in the front, so no, you can't do that. So is that something that we're open to? Is there a specific setback? So what I have here is example, here's where our setbacks right now, rear half of the lot behind the principal structure, can't put in front, 5 feet from the property line, shall not exceed 15 feet in height, which actually I could see that 15 feet in height causing problems with carports
Can I
because
ask you,
they need 14 feet minimum clear underneath it.
let me ask you a question though, because Walmart, I agree with you, right, faces the front. What about Target? Target, the front doesn't face the road,
Yeah.
right? The front
Yeah,
faces
what's the front?
south. What's the front? Is the front Richard Street?
Mhm.
You know, that's what I would consider the front, which is actually the back of the building.
Yep. Yeah, if I had to look at it, someone came into me and said, where's the front of the
Yeah,
building
well,
line? It's
well-
actually the side of the building. So part of the parking lot
You
is
say
in the
like the
side.
old Richard Court, that would be the front of the building to you? That side street?
Oh, no, well, the side facing, if it's not broken with another line in front of another property, I don't think it is, but facing the Berlin Turnpike could be a front. And if it's facing the
Yeah, so
side street
that's the
too,
old Richard
they're both
Court.
fronts, technically.
Mr. Minor?
Yeah, just two to look at, Paul, that maybe touch base with both West Hartford and Manchester.
Mhm.
Because both Buckland Hills as well as West Farms have installed parking solar arrays. Just see what they've got and see if there's been any issues with that. But I know one is that 15 feet is definitely higher than that.
Mhm.
But I have heard more and more consideration given to them because of the benefits of A, generating the solar and producing their energy, but also with us in New England of having a reduced area for snow removal. And the areas of parking spaces during the day are usually clogged up, so they're not able to plow properly. So as long as they have open lanes,
Mhm.
there's a benefit to them as well on that by reducing their square footage. So
Yeah.
there's something I think to look at. I'd rather have some type of control over versus, nope, can't do it.
Cause right now it's unknown to a property owner or developer when we tell them, okay, you gotta come into the commission. What are the requirements? Well, we'll deal with that when we get there. It's,
No.
that's not the best way to approach a project, and it's good for them to have some information ahead of time to say, okay, this works, but on my part, the important part is to make sure what we propose works.
Middletown has allowed the parking lot solar panels, so you might want to talk to them too.
So what I have here is, again, these are our current requirements. We can switch to the next one. So,
Seating 15 feet though could be an issue. Because
yes,
you're gonna need, typically they're on an
Mhm.
angle, you need 15 feet on the low end. Because you gotta
Yeah.
get
what,
trucks underneath.
what I found in the literature out there is most users, 14 feet is the minimum clearance that they would want underneath it. For most,
6 is legal
Yeah.
for a road. just-
you're not gonna get a fire truck under 14 feet though. Not easily, or there could be concerns on that one. So where it goes, there could be those considerations, but most parking spaces, the 14 feet, but yeah, you're talking 14 feet to the bottom of the structure, the structure on top of it, and you have the panels, it's gonna be over 15 feet.
13.6 is the maximum height for a vehicle, but as far.
No, we're under 13.6.
So 13.
But you're
13.6.
really starting to get to that,
Yeah.
threshold that you don't want to hit.
I mean, I have a truck that's 13.4 and I can tell you we go through very slowly through a lot of bridges.
Yeah,
Well, I know the state requirement is 18 or 20, something like that.
13.6.
16, well, yeah, but most of our
That's a
bridges are
federal-
higher than that
Yes.
now.
Yes,
Federal standard.
yeah.
so when I was looking at other towns, the setbacks are all over the place. Again, every regulation is different for every municipality. I will definitely look at some of those ones, especially that were mentioned. But from the front, some are not permitted in the front at all. There's one out there that says, if you're 75 feet back, it's okay. So that's something else to consider, that if we were okay with like the Walmarts and those things, how far back, you might not want them right against the front of the Berlin Turnpike. That well, number one, we don't allow anything within the first 35 feet anyway. Nothing can be built there except, having a transformer in a corner or something like that. But how far back should it be, and how is that going to affect the overall aesthetic? For the side, most of them are typically 25 feet and others are about 25 feet. So that's what I was finding for the ground mount for other towns. A lot of them actually require 25 feet from additional properties. And the height ranges range from 4 feet in some residential areas. So like the first picture I showed of the solar in the backyard, where it's that's the way to do it. Up to 33 feet with additional heights even greater in non-residential areas. And most of them were, okay, you can go 22 feet, but if you go over that, you have to go for a special permit. So it gets a higher level of scrutiny, but most of them were like around that 20 something. Then once you got higher, it required either a very industrial zone or a special permit.
You might want to check with CROG too, Paul, to see what they have. I thought I heard, I don't know if it was one of the towns in the CROG that, one of the meetings I attended, they were starting to put those in, but had some pretty good height, clearances for equipment to get underneath the
Yeah.
stuff, so.
So CROG had a study and a thing they put out in 2013, and when I read through it, I'm like, this is a bit out of date. Yeah, it's amazing what 11 years will do
I know.
when it comes to the technology and what it's out there. So from here, there's the other item. So I'll kind of recap on solar. It sounds like there is interest in me generating a regulation.
Yes.
So we have an understanding, and so applicants coming in can have an understanding of what we're looking to do. If an application comes in the interim, it'll be dealt with how it was dealt before, accessory, come with a site plan mod if it's industrial. But I think moving towards having clearly understood regulations would be a benefit to people looking to put solar on their property. So there's the other items. Again, we talked about geothermal, not included. I don't really see a big need for it. Wind is not included, but other people have regulations out there. Is that something that right now we would consider not permitted to put a large wind structure? I know typically those are set back about the height of them. Most people are like 80 feet so this is big turbine. There are other small roof mounted systems out there. Some of them are actually cylindrical. They're about the size of a trash can. And they mount to the edge of a roof, and they don't actually spin like a normal turbine would. It's actually a cylindrical turbine that just spins on that one and generates that. A lot of people say they just limit it to 10 feet above the permitted height in the zone. That's something to consider. Do we want to encourage wind? If someone came in right now, we wouldn't really have a great answer for them other than just don't go over the height for the zone. And it's just like a solar panel for a roof.
Right.
But is this something that we're concerned about? Do we want to encourage larger wind? We really aren't the scale and size to have huge wind turbines and farms. There isn't a lot of property out there. But if someone came in and asked for one right now, my answer would be it's not permitted in the regulations. And then the other one is fuel cells.
I guess if they took it to court, we probably lose and it would.
Yeah, by not having it in. And so it is a question is, do we want to, and there's something to think about, it's not an answer for tonight too. And just think about what would be the visual impact of a large turbine in the town, an 80-foot pole sitting out there. It's like a cell phone tower. It is good to encourage alternative energy. It's part of our POCD. It's part of the general zoning regulations and the requirements for the state to encourage that. But if we do go down that route, so no one has come in and asked to put in, I don't think even since you've been here, no one's asked to put in a large, I think they're
Had any inquiry about.
they're not as pressing as they were before. People are moving towards solar.
I just got back from
Yeah.
San Francisco. It's like driving through a Star Wars minefield. Those things are scary.
Yeah.
They're monstrous. They're monstrous.
Yeah, but so maybe those wouldn't be as applicable, but for me, the small roof mounted systems are kind of interesting. They're another way to generate it. I could see someone having that and solar panels on their roof. So, hey, the sun's not shining, but it's a stormy day, you're still generating.
You happen to be in that area where you are catching some prevailing winds because of the way it's channeled.
Yep.
It might work.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Any other comments? Oh, Mark should try to draft some rough regulations up on that.
Yep. So the one item I like to share too is, so the fuel cells, most of the fuel cell that comes actually be, sorry, most of the fuel cells will be in front of the siting council. We don't see them too often. If a small one came in, we can incorporate in it. I can make sure that we don't, we're not stepping on the toes of the siting council. But really how it works is if someone comes to us for an approval and they get an approval from us, it doesn't exempt them from the siting council. They just went through an extra hurdle that they didn't need to go through. But if they go to the siting council, I was talking about before, it's the siting council and we're there saying, here's what the town is concerned about. So for fuel cells, most of them will be from the siting council, but I can look into that a little more if we're interested. If we're looking at batteries and we're looking at solar, that we should be looking at all of these alternative energies and how they fit into the bucket of how we're regulating them. Just make sure we're not missing something.
Well, I know I mentioned to Paul that the University of Hartford was putting in fuel cells and it's gonna be a big setup in there. They had to come through the Hartford Flood Commission to go underneath the the natural gas line underneath the brook there. I don't know if that's up and coming, or if it's stopped, or if it's equal with what's going on. That's the first major fuel cell that I had heard about in this area. But it may be something down the line, I don't know. Any comments? Might wanna look at that too. I did give you the, excuse me, Hartford regulations.
You wanna go one more? And these are impossible to read from here. So it's a lot on one. So the main ones, and I can share these and I'll include them in a future report.
Right.
But the main ones is from their regulations, they have transportation and utilities as a large bucket. And then they have specific requirements on that. And again, it includes street right of way, rail right of ways, electric or gas services, sewer treatment, water treatment, pumping station, transmission, and energy conversion systems. So this is typically how they would be regulating BESS and fuel cells. But the main ones that I'll just read out is their safety considerations. So all buildings and structures shall be set back from every adjacent property a minimum of 25 feet. In addition, not closer than 50 feet from any adjacent residential property. Then it talk about a tower setback. If you have a tower, as we know, it's actually in our regulations now for cell towers that the height of that tower, it better be that far set back from the property. So if it does fall, it doesn't fall on someone else's property. It's contained within. So that's the setbacks that they were recommending. Again, 25 feet from every adjacent property and 50 feet from a residential property. The infrastructure shall be suitably screened from any adjacent residential property, solid fence or planting screen, which shall provide year-round screening. If we're going along the lines of BESS and things like that, especially residential zone, but even for a BESS, I would say from the right of way as well too, depending on where it's located and if it's prominent, especially in front of the site. And again, they actually have a requirement too that the zoning administrator shall provide the chief of police or his designee with the opportunity to provide input on applications for transportation system and utilities, and that input will be considered by the commission. Normally, I don't like drafting regulations that have too many outside agencies that don't have zoning authority. However, we do have stuff that has fire marshal input and all that. So that's something for us to consider. For me, the police, yes, especially with large, they could have concerns. They could have concerns with the fencing, things like that, how it's situated, and the safety concerns around it. The fire marshal's concerns are paramount when it comes to BESS and things of that nature. So that'll be as we look forward. So that's kind of what I put together for you tonight to think about all these alternative energy sources. And again, working towards us having something in our regulation that clearly spells out what Newington is looking for. So if you like, I can pull a lot of these together, provide some draft ones of what I might think might be the best in our case, see how it's worked. And again, West Hartford, Manchester, Middletown with the larger solar carports and kind of move from there. So it's kind of, I think having BESS at the next one, if they're willing to come and talk to the commission, it seems like there's interest in that. The solar regulations, we'll work through that. And I do plan on continuing again with that public act regulation, bringing them forward with an alternative, the bare minimum, and then some alternatives beyond that. I think that's the end
Why
of
don't you
it.
just draft those up? We'll see what you come up with, okay?
Yep. And I thank
Is that
you
okay with
all,
the commission?
thank you all for your input, and I welcome any additional input.
Old business, none?
None.
Okay. Issues for scheduling, Mr. Planner.
So these were, this is the one that was talked about previously, but I think it's the 14th of
Tentatively scheduled for,
yeah,
yes.
of August, that we're looking to have this on the for a hearing. We are getting information from them. So this is the 175 Lowry Place, the indoor trampoline park. We've met out there with the owner and the applicant. We're reviewing the state of the property and just working towards and making sure, again, what comes in front of you has a rounded application. So that's anticipated to come before you on the 14th of August. And likely there's a place of worship who's looking to go into 795 North Mountain Road that may be on the same date as well for a public hearing. Going to look into the industrial zone. As you know, places of worship are allowed in all zones by special permit in Newington.
Thank you.
The old Knights of Columbus, that there were, I thought there was already.
No, this is not the Knights of Columbus. This is
What's
farther
another?
around towards the Hartford Avenue side. I think it's the old Enviroscience.
Is that in the old Loctite building?
No,
Enviroscience used to be in there, maybe. I don't know if Oxide was in there before that.
The Loctite,
No, they-
pretty much,
Past the Portuguese
the whole
Club.
other half.
closer to
All-
Mountain
That was
View.
all Loctite.
Or Hartford Avenue, excuse me.
All right, thank you. Any communications?
None.
Okay. Second round of public participation. Maybe wish you to come up and talk, please. Let us know.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, we did skip over town plan report, but I
Oh,
will
I'm
say,
sorry.
that's okay. But I will say that, I was working on some other stuff when I got back from vacation, so I didn't have a large site inspection. But I will be going out to the sites between now and the next, meeting to kind of provide update, especially on, Culver Street and, the apartment.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, on the progress on the site, update the commission and actually, keep an eye on the site as well. And then also, potentially Rock Hole Brook subdivision to take a look at how that's working along as well, to give an idea of the level of grading, where they're at, and then whatever else I can provide the commission with updates on.
All right, thank you. Now, public participation. Anybody on?
No one online, Mr. Chairman?
Councilwoman Draco, please come up.
Just with your discussion about the electronic vehicle charging parking stations, I was just curious, I noticed that there was nothing in there regarding handicap parking.
Yeah,
I would imagine that the has to be parking are extended.
you have to offer the same. So like if you should have some handicap charging stations as well.
Yep.
It's just like ADA requirements. They have to have, whatever these have, you have to offer them the same.
So in discussion with, again, the planners group out there, this did come up, a lot of stuff came up with how their building officials view it or not. A lot of that would be regulated under building code.
I was gonna say,
Under 80,
right, yeah.
There are some regulations out there that say, they spell it out that you need to provide X, Y, and Z. However, that's typically handled under building code and could change. And again, with the whole thing, it could exclude even more that might not be used. However, it does provide the inclusionary aspect of having it there and making sure that those who have electric vehicles who require those spaces do have a place to park and park close and where they need to go to get into the building. So typically that would be handled under building code. I can look for other examples if the commission wants to see that as well.
Looking at the ones that the DOT put in, there's a lot of space in between them. I think it's just a matter of putting a sign up.
Well, my concern is the distance too from the, particularly in a residential or
Entrance.
Right.
commercial.
It's a handicap.
If you're gonna put, your 10 stations at the back of the parking lot, the entrance, that's, presents a walk a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Anybody online, Eric?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Move on to remarks by commissioners. Oh, I'm sorry, Bob. Come on up, please.
Howard in the street. Chairman, I just have a question for Paul. Well, actually, you mentioned it too, Mr. Chairman. Hydrogen cells. I'm doing some of my own research on it, and it seemed pretty positive. I was an electrician, I'm not an engineer. I played one on TV, but if you could look into that some more. What I was researching, I just found some positive. Solar, we talked about all kinds of things, but it's very informative. You probably very, you give us a lot of information. It's very good. More than I can handle. But if you look into hydrogen, just a little bit. I know we're open-minded. That was the vibration in the whole room. But I just think maybe that might be the future, but that word was used a couple times going forward. So that's all. Thank
All
you,
right,
Mr. Chairman.
thank you, Mr. Jolly. Paul,
Yep.
could you look at that, please?
Yep, and I think, well, I can answer too, because I've done some of my own research too on it as well. And the interesting thing, if, again, the technology is kind of out there, they're gonna have the same issue as the supply chain for electrical right now. And the range anxiety and the issues of hydrogen does not have a large distribution network, and you need to build a totally new industry to be able to produce the level of hydrogen needed to move the entire fleet of the United States.
Yep.
That's a lot. But the advantage is if it does move that way in the future, gas stations just get replaced. Hydrogen, the newer ones on that, it really is plug and play cells where you'd be showing up and take them out. There's going to be, the future of that is just as muddy as electric cars was a while ago. Because electric cars, when they started out, and they're still a little muddy where Tesla had a different charger, you have this and that, you couldn't use some stations and another, and there's some standardization that happens. Hydrogen will be interesting to see what type of standardization that happens, because the cells will need to, probably will need some federal level of regulation to standardize the industry. Because, okay, are you just, BP have their own type of cell? Does Ford have their own, like, okay, BP station only carries these two, Ford has that, Chevy has this. That's going to require a lot of work to figure that out. And that's probably why it hasn't really even taken off that much too. Because I think the future of hydrogen is not so much as in like a natural gas station where you go hook it up and highly pressurized tank. It's more of the replaceable cells. That's what I think will move it forward more into the future. But I think the country is nowhere near that yet. We're still figuring out electric and moving it forward. I think there's more standardization now than there was and more charging out there. But I could be wrong, but that's a couple decades off to being fully something is my guess. But hey, technology moves quick. Could be here in 10 years.
I do know there was a federal grant out for school buses, electric school buses. And unfortunately, Newington didn't qualify because we weren't big enough.
No.
They did pass it along to the chairman of the Board of Education.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that also comes with a clean air mandate that same act that requires the 10% that requires the fleets to transfer over.
Right.
So that's going to be a challenge for a lot of municipalities and companies in Connecticut.
Yes.
Most of us forget this, but I mean, Mr. Addison drove an electric car. We abandoned electric motor vehicles.
Can you speak up,
100 years-
please?
We abandoned motor vehicles 100 years ago. Electric motor vehicles, because gas was pennies per gallon and gas was the winner. So, yeah, if we had stuck with it, we would probably be in a much better place,
Yeah.
but it is what it is right now.
They went the way of the trolley car for a little while.
Remarks by commissioners, that's it. No more remarks, okay. All right, Marks, thank you very much. I appreciate everybody showing up. Have a great night and stay cool. Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? All in favor? Thank you. Gio, I think I talked about housing.
Yeah, I was on information.
10-hour day.
We have a client.